Welcome to Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we're going to wrap ourselves up, at least mentally, and set off into the cold, dark, incredibly wet winters of medieval Scotland. And spoiler alert, you probably won't make it out of this alive. Not without cold remedies, peat smoke in your lungs, and a diet of boiled barley that may or may not contain a rat. Does that still sound relaxing? Perfect. So, before you get too comfortable, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. No pressure. Also, write your city and what time it is in the comments below. I'm always curious about where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for a low hum in the background. And let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the middle of a frozen bog. The gloomy sky is a suffocating gray that never quite turns into daylight. It just oscillates between mist and twilight. It's as if the sun can't even be bothered to show up. There is a constant wind blowing from nowhere in particular. If you are lucky, it tosses your cloak about, but mostly it cuts through every layer of wool like a knife through butter. It is cold, not just the kind that hurts. It is a cold that seeps into your bones, your thoughts, your very soul. Honestly, this is normal. Welcome to winter in medieval Scotland. We are in the 1300s. The dates aren't precise because calendars weren't hanging on the wall of every farmhouse. Time is now more of a feeling. For instance, the sheep look colder than usual. It must be late November. You are part of a small rural village tucked into a windy glen, and your main goal for the next few months is simple. Don't die. That's it. No winter sports. No Christmas markets. No emergency heating. There's essentially no emergency backup at all. The land is raw and untamed. In winter, the Highlands are particularly brutal. Miles of icy bogs and frozen hills where nothing grows, and almost nothing moves except the wind. That wind is always there. It whistles through every crack in your home. It finds the weak spots in your clothes and makes your teeth ache even when your mouth is closed. Your home, if you can call a home, consists of a smoke-filled, low, turf-roof hut made of stones gathered nearby and held together by a prehistoric sort of Play-Doh made of clay, manure, and whatever else stuck. The walls are thick, yes, but insulation isn't really a concept yet. The wind still gets in. The damp always gets in. And the roof, masterfully thatched with straw, tends to drip a little when the snow melts, which, thankfully, rarely happens before March. Occasionally, a mouse rustles in the rafters, and someone swears it's the ghost of a cousin who died last winter. That's half a joke. Only half. You try to warm yourself by the fire, but the smoke doesn't rise properly through a chimney. Since there is no chimney, it hangs suspended in the air under the roof, swirling around the room, looking for someone to slowly suffocate. Congratulations. You've just inhaled your annual dose of lung-blackening soot. The fire itself burns peat. There is no wood here. Trees are rare, even sacred, and most were cut down centuries ago. You have peat, dug from nearby bogs, dried for months, and then burned slowly, pungent, damp, earthy, smelling like ancient moss having a midlife crisis. But it counts as heat, and in this world, counts as is enough. Outside, the ground is frozen solid. Mud, the earth that squelches underfoot in summer, is now rock hard and coated in ice. Your boots, if you have boots, don't help much. They are hardened and cracked, held together by hope and animal sinew, and your toes were numb sometime last week. You don't mention it. Everyone faces the same danger of frostbite, and honestly, frostbite isn't the worst thing you can get. The worst thing is hunger, a truly bone-shaking, sleep-interrupting hunger, because winter doesn't care how well your harvest went. It will outlast your stocks if it wants to. Maybe your community salted enough fish. Maybe someone hunted a deer in late autumn. Maybe the granaries weren't gnawed by rats, but they probably were. You look at the sheep a little more thoughtfully than you should, not as suppliers of wool, but as potential stew ingredients. Historically, Scotland's winters weren't just cold. They were long days with almost no sun. During the long nights, the only entertainment was talking, praying, and listening to the wolves. Yes, wolves were still there. Sometimes in winter, they came closer, hungry and desperate, just like everyone else. And let's just say the wooden doors didn't exactly have deadbolts. You wrap your hands around an earthenware mug filled with something warm. Probably a weak ale, small beer. Even if the water is frozen, it's not safe to drink straight. Parasites aren't seasonal. That's why the children drink ale too. Don't get excited. It's weak, almost non-alcoholic, and exists mostly to keep you from getting dysentery. Fun times. You listen as someone tells a story by the fire. An old tale about a man who tried to leave the village in a blizzard and came back with a wild look in his eyes and less family than he left with. No one asks questions. The children pretend not to listen, but their wide eyes say otherwise. That's the point. Survival here isn't just physical. It's psychological. Every winter takes a little more from you. Your health, your hope, maybe even your memory of warmth. You don't count the days. You endure them. You wait for a thaw that feels more like a rumor than a guarantee. And yet, people survived. Barely. Somehow, through cooperation, faith, and sheer stubbornness. Now, there are debates about how cold it actually got. Some say the Little Ice Age hadn't fully kicked in yet. Some argue regional microclimates made it worse. But no matter which historian you agree with, one thing is clear. Medieval Scottish winters were no joke, and neither is the current chill. Go ahead, wrap your blanket a little tighter around your shoulders. We are just getting started. When you wake up the next morning, for a moment, you think you've gone blind. Everything is gray. Gray sky. Gray breath in front of your face. Gray frost clinging to the inside of your walls. Then you realize, no, you aren't blind. It's just winter again. The sun technically rose an hour ago, but you'd have to squint through the fog and low cloud cover to prove it. Daylight here isn't bright. It's more of suggestion. There are no alarm clocks, but the sound of movement around you, the rustle of rough wool, the scraping of a pot, the groan of someone pulling on cold boots, tell you it's time to start another day of trying not to freeze, starve, or crack your head open on the ice. So you stand up and your joints crack like a breaking twig. Another perfect morning in medieval Scotland. The moment you step into the crisp air, you regret it. Your nose protests, your eyes water. The air is so cold it leaves a metallic taste, like biting a spoon. Your breath leaves your mouth in ghostly clouds of steam, and the only color in front of your eyes comes from a single stubborn patch of red lichen clinging to a rock. This looks like a landscape that doesn't want people living in it, but somehow they do in your village. Time is a fluid concept. There are no printed calendars, no clocks ticking gently on mantles. You mark the passage of days by the stars, the condition of the sheep's wool, and how much your joints ache. Some families use simple notchsticks, carving a groove each day like prisoners in a cell. Others rely on oral memory, which leads to arguments about whether it's Tuesday or the feast day of some long-forgotten saint who died of cold. This is where the old traditions slowly come into play. You gather with others around the fire. Someone mentions the length of the shadows, and that the crows were flying lower yesterday. A storm is coming. A voice says, there is no science here, only instinct and centuries of experience. Observation. It is a world built on watching these patterns. Nature isn't just scenery. It is a village clock, calendar, and warning system all rolled into one. Some ancient versions of calendars do exist. If you walk a few miles to a certain outcrop of standing stones, which the elders speak like a holy place, you will find prehistoric stone circles aligned with the solstices. One of these, perhaps the Callanish stones or something eerily similar, catches the low winter sun at just the right angle on the shortest day of the year. It reminds you that your ancestors, no matter how ancient, watched the sky. They had to. Missing the turning point of winter meant missing the planting time later. And if you miss planting time, you miss eating time. And if you miss eating time, you die. But that's for later. Right now, your task is just to get through this winter without counting the number of ribs on your neighbor's chest, because food shortages affect people. Speaking of the sky, it's worth noting that the scant daylight doesn't do you much good. In the shortest days of December and January, you are lucky if you get even 6 hours of sunlight. The darkness is the darkness of twilight, assuming, of course, the clouds break long enough to let the pale sun in. Most of the time, the sky is like a low sponge dripping icy mist onto everything. It never quite rains properly. It just constantly leaks. Even snow is sometimes a treat. More often, it's sleet, wet, heavy, cold in every way. When snow does fall, it is notable for its eerie, too quiet beauty that makes you worry something is hiding behind it. Your footsteps become muffled. The sheep don't bleed as much. Even the wind dies down a little, as if it's waiting. You don't trust the snow. It hides things like ice patches, animal tracks, and pitfalls into frozen streams. It is nature's softest weapon. Still, some of your neighbors try to view the season through the lens of old beliefs. Winter, they say, is when the earth sleeps. The trees sleep, the ground sleeps. Bears, well, there used to be bears, they sleep. Humans? Humans can't sleep. Humans chop wood, carry water, try not to get pneumonia, and hope they have stored enough oats to last until April. There is also a prevailing belief that winter is when the veil is thinnest. You might have heard this around Samhain, Halloween, when October ends and the nights push the limits of your patience. It is a time of spirits, old gods, and old fears. People talk of shapeshifters, of the washer at the ford washing death shrouds in frozen streams, and of the Cailleach, Scotland's ancient winter goddess. It is said the Cailleach, walking the mountains with frost in her hair, controls winter itself, shaping the landscape with her staff and deciding when spring will come. Spoiler, she's in no hurry. But don't laugh too hard at the folklore. When everything around you is dying or sleeping and your body aches from a cold, believing in unseen forces makes strange sense. In a way, it helps. It gives winter a name, a face, something you can curse when the roof collapses under ice or the cow doesn't make it through the night. And here is an interesting thing. Some old Gaelic poems actually celebrate winter. They speak of a kind of intense joy in survival, of pushing forward despite the impossible. It's not comforting, nor is it romantic. It is a raw, desperate pride, as if to say, "Ha! The wind tried to kill me again, but I'm still here. That is the mood here. That is the weather." Today, scholars debate how much scientific understanding medieval Scots had of their climate. There is no consensus. Some argue coastal communities understood the influence of ocean currents and tides better than we think. Others believe most people simply survive day to day. No need for theory. What is clear is that observation was everything. You either paid attention or you paid the price. Someone in your village throws another brick of peat on the fire, and everyone scoots a little closer to the fire pit. For a while, there is no talking. Just the sound of the wind outside and an occasional cough. Wet, rattling sounds, likely the start of something no one wants to name. In the corner, a child wrapped in 2 layers of thin wool, pink from the cold even under the blankets, stirs. His mother pulls him closer, muttering something in Gaelic under her breath. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. You don't ask. Instead, you stretch your legs out and stare into flames. They flicker dimly, shivering with the hiss of damp peat. The earthy, dense smell sinks into your hair, your clothes, your thoughts. You carry it everywhere with you, long after the fires have gone out as the cold truly setting outside, and the wind picks up again, slamming against the walls with that low, echoing thud. You retreat back into a hut trembling in a way that shakes everything inside, even your bones. Even if the shelter is architecturally the equivalent of a damp sock, you are grateful for any shelter at all. It's not much, but it's better than sleeping outside with the crows, right? Although, depending on how last night went, you can't be sure someone isn't doing exactly that. Your house, like everyone else's here, is built for function, not comfort. It's called a blackhouse, not because it's gothic or edgy, but because the smoke from the peat fire stains everything black. The walls, the ceiling, the rafters, your lungs. Everything inside is black. The roof is a wooden skeleton that creaks menacingly when the wind changes direction, covered in thick layers of straw. The structure sits low to the ground. This isn't out of humility, but because tall buildings tend to blow away in the wind. Inside, the floor consists of packed earth covered in rushes that need to be replaced. They need to be replaced much more often than they are. One corner of the room is roughly fenced off for the animals. Yes, inside. Heat is hard to come by, and a cow gives off a surprising amount of it. Plus, if the wind keeps howling like that outside, you'll be hugging that cow like your childhood teddy bear. There is no glass in the windows, just a rough wooden shutter that is closed at night or during storms, which is most nights. There is a single door, maybe, if you are lucky, covered by a thick wool curtain or a rough wattle door. Otherwise, it's open to the cold. People like to imagine medieval life as rustic and charming. This isn't that. Mud, smoke, animals stepping on your feet in the middle of the night. And if you think insulation is a modern problem, you're right. But it's also your problem. The cold seeps in from every direction. The walls are stone, but they hold the cold as if they are hoarding it. The roof isn't much better. If you sit too close to the outer wall, you wake up with ice crystals in your hair. The blankets are made of wool, yes, but they are also thin and heavy, and most are secondhand, meaning they have seen things. Things you don't want to think about. Still, you do what you can. People hang animal skins over doors and windows to block the worst drafts. Some even spread moss among the roof thatch to slow the dripping of melting frost. It's not perfect, but nothing here is perfect. And oh, the draft. It's not like a gentle breeze. It's a chill that sneaks in like a gossiping neighbor, working its way right down to the bone. Silent, rude, and impossible to get rid of. You light a fire, yes, but it doesn't heat the room. It only creates a warm zone around itself. And even then, if you sit just outside arm's reach of the flames, everything beyond that radius is Arctic tundra. You find yourself slowly rotating, positioned like a rotisserie chicken, trying to roast one side of your body without setting your cloak on fire. This is a skill everyone here learns young. The art of partial thaw. One side of your leg feels like it's sweating while the other side is practically ice. Furniture is sparse. Maybe a rough table, a bench, and if someone in the family is particularly handy or stole something nice, a wooden chest or two. Beds, if they exist, contained nothing you'd actually want to sleep on. A simple wooden frame stuffed with straw, covered with itchy wool or worn animal hides. You share it with at least 2, probably 3 people. There is no such thing as privacy. Body heat is what matters. Yet, there is a strange comfort to it. Proximity. When the wind howls outside and everyone is gathered around the fire telling stories, sharing whatever meager food is left. For a moment, it's easy to forget how cold it is. You trick yourself into thinking you're almost warm. Interesting historical note. In some communities, animals weren't just kept inside for warmth. They were called family members. There are records of cows having names, being mourned when they died, and even being mentioned in songs. You can't joke about that here. When your only source of milk, warmth, and potential dinner has a name like Morag or Seamus, you respect it. And let's not forget, there are no toilets. If you are lucky, there is a chamber pot in the corner. Otherwise, you have to make a quick walk to the edge of the field at night, accompanied by a lantern and a prayer. Try not to slip on the ice or step in something worse. The ground outside is basically a communal trash can for humans and animals. In the morning, a few unlucky souls will toss it onto the midden heap, and yes, it's frozen solid. Good luck. But there is logic to this rough life. The architecture here wasn't designed for aesthetics. It emerged from centuries of trial and error. Tall buildings with pointed roofs blew away. Flat roofs collapsed under snow. Huts were built low with thick walls, often dug slightly into the earth to steal a small amount of geothermal heat. In some places, people even built their homes into hillsides. Nature isn't the enemy here, but she isn't your friend either, so you cooperate with her as best you can. There is some debate among archaeologists about how uniform these houses were. Did every family build the same type of house? Or were there local variation, materials, layouts, and heat levels depending on geography and resources? Some ruins suggest wealthier clans had larger dwellings, sometimes even with separate sections for animals. But for most people, the home was always a single room, an all-purpose space. You hear someone chopping wood outside. That's your fuel for the week. If you have trees, otherwise it's back to digging peat. Your hands are cracked from the cold. Your nails are black with dirt. No gloves, just calluses and complaints. And when it's wet outside, which is always, everything feels heavier. Dragging a single sodden brick of peat can feel like dragging a body. But you keep going. Because what else can you do? The hut may be primitive, but it's your only refuge from a winter that wants to eat you alive. It's where you sleep, eat, listen to stories, pray, and wait for the sun to return. Outside, the wind keeps blowing, because it never really stops. Not here. You wake up hungry again. Not the polite kind of hunger you feel when you skip lunch, but hollow, ignored ache that makes your ribs feel loose and your brain feel like it's floating strangely in the air. It's been like this for days, maybe weeks. It's hard to tell now. Time blurs when you eat the same gray stew at every meal. Or worse, when there is no stew. This is winter in medieval Scotland, and if you thought freezing to death was the worst part, here is another surprise. Hunger waits in the shadows, grinning at you as if it is all the time in the world. The food situation is, in a word, bleak. Every village handles it slightly differently, but the basic plan for most is the same. Harvest as much as you can in late summer and autumn. Salt or smoke, whatever will spoil. Dry everything else. Stuff it into any storage space not filled with tools or rodents, and hope you haven't miscalculated. Because if you have, you've sentenced your family to a very long, very slow death. No pressure. Your winter pantry, if we're being generous enough to call it pantry, might contain barley flour, oats, dried peas, salted meat, usually pork or fish, and maybe a root vegetable or two if the earth has been merciful. There is no fresh bread unless someone managed to dry grain and keep some yeast alive. No fruit unless someone pickled apples in a barrel and remembered where they put them. And definitely no sugar. Sweet things are rare this time of year, and like distant childhood dreams or the feeling of having all your toes, they are mostly forgotten at MY breakfast today is thin oatmeal. Again, if you live in the wild, it consists of water, oats, and a little salt. No milk. Either it's soured weeks ago or the cow has run dry. If you are lucky, a piece of smoked fish might have been thrown in for flavor, which is a generous description. The texture is gritty, and the smell is somewhere between a barn floor and old socks, but you eat it anyway, because what is the alternative? In famine years, the meals get even smaller. People start boiling tree bark, eating boiled nettles, making broth from bones so old you have to crack them to suck out the very last trace of marrow. There are actual records of this. Archaeologists have found bones broken, boiled, and scraped repeatedly until they were almost dust. This wasn't just efficient. This was desperation by the ladleful. And yes, let's address the rumors. Cannibalism is technically rare, but not unheard of. There are scattered reports during famine years and whispers in later centuries. Whole villages disappeared. Children went missing. A cousin who went looking for turnips never came back. Were they eaten? Who knows? When the snow falls, the line between folklore and reality blurs. But when the food runs out, people do things they never thought possible. You start looking at the family dog with uncomfortably mathematical thoughts in your eyes. Time for an interesting fact. In some parts of Scotland, there were laws regarding the communal use of food stores. In tightly knit clans, it wasn't unusual for the chief or laird to ration and redistribute food during harsh winters. There was honor in keeping people alive, but there was also pressure. If someone was hoarding food, they might wake up to find their granary mysteriously emptied, and no one would admit to doing it, because food wasn't just about survival. It was also politics. It was power. This meant food storage became a sort of sacred ritual. Every grain was guarded like gold. People dug underground pits to keep root vegetables cool but prevent them from freezing. They hung meats from the rafters to keep them dry and away from rats. Salted fish were stacked in barrels, carefully layered like a sad, greasy lasagna. The whole system was delicate. And if any part failed, if a rat got in, if mold formed, if someone got greedy, everything could collapse. Winters existed. Food also had cultural significance. Believe it or not, festivals like Yule or Imbolc offer an opportunity to bring out something a little special. Maybe a better cut of meat or something sweetened with honey, if anyone still had honey. These weren't feasts like in the legends. They were small moments of solace, reminders that not everything about winter was a punishment. And yet, food was never far from anyone's mind. It defined your day, woke you up, decided what chores you would do, gather wood or fish through the ice. It might determine who you spend time with. If someone had a better stock, you might suddenly drop by their workshop. It's all very casual. Pretending it's a social visit while your eyes are locked in the pot boiling in the corner. Some villagers kept chickens, and if you did, eggs were worth their weight in gold. They were literally life-giving. The problem is, chickens don't lay much in the freezing cold. They huddle together. They hardly cluck. And you start looking at them more as meat than breakfast producers. But still, you wait, you stretch, you scrape the bowl. Because winter isn't a sprint, it's a siege. There's debate among historians about exactly how this played out. Severe winters occurred in Scotland during the Middle Ages. Some argue the weather was milder in earlier centuries, but worsened during the Little Ice Age of the 1300s and beyond. Others claim that even before this, food security was a constant struggle due to a combination of high rainfall, poor soil, and short growing seasons. Whatever the case, it is clear that food scarcity was not an extraordinary event. It was expected. Even children felt the weight of it. They were sent to dig roots, gather moss for firewood, or guard food stores from pests. There was no children's table at winter meals. Everyone ate the same tasteless soup, and everyone hoped it would be enough. Towards late February, hunger intensified. Stores were almost completely empty. People began reducing their portions. More water in the porridge, less scrap meat in the stew. You see it in people's faces. Cheeks hollow out, eyes sink, hands tremble from cold and lack of calories. You no longer expect to feel full. Now you just hope not to feel worse. Tonight, there's talk of setting traps. Someone swore they saw rabbits down in the glen. Someone else says it's a waste of time. The next village over already took them all. But you go anyway, because it's better than sitting by the fire thinking about how your stomach feels like it's shrinking. Outside, the wind is harsh. Your feet crunch on the frost. Every breath cuts. But if you bring back something, anything, you're a hero. You are the savior of dinner. If you don't, there is always more bark to boil. The fire burns a little lower tonight, and no one bothers to add more peat. Like everything else, You try to use it sparingly. That's the problem with winter here. It's not one thing. It's not just the cold. It's not just the hunger. It's not just the wind trying to whisper insults through the door cracks. It's a slow-rolling misery sandwich of all of them combined. And tonight, topped with smoke. Lots of smoke. You sit cross-legged by the hearth. You blink in the hazy air. Your eyes burn. Your lungs feel heavy. Across the room, someone coughs that deep, hacking cough that has started to sound too familiar. And no one says anything. Because what can you say? You all breathe it every hour of every day. The thick, tar-like smoke of burning peat. The only source of heat for miles. And likely the reason your chest feels like wet clay. Peat is a miracle in a way. There are no trees here. Not many. The Highlands are mostly treeless thanks to a few thousand years of enthusiastic deforestation and general environmental indifference. So when winter knocks, you head for the bog. Peat is basically ancient plant matter mashed and marinated in bog water for thousands of years. You dig it up in thick bricks. If you plan ahead, you dry it for weeks or months, and then burn in your hearth for heat and light, and a vague sense that you aren't completely powerless against nature. The problem is, peat smoke isn't subtle. It doesn't drift gently into the night. It sits, it clings, it curls upward, and then, without a chimney to guide it out, it rises. It hangs there at the top of the room, like it's paying rent. That's why they call them blackhouses, not for the color scheme or atmosphere, because the ceilings and rafters are literally coated in soot. And that soot gets into your clothes, your belongings. It coats your hair, your food, your pots. It slides down the walls and gets under your fingernails. Slowly, it lives inside you, a presence creeping into your chest. Whether you are very old or very young, you are the first to feel it. The cough starts. Then comes the chest pain. There is no word for chronic bronchitis in your village, but many people understand what it's like for someone to start shrinking under the weight of their own lungs. It's not just a cough either. There's damage, sinus problems, and a strange raspiness you can't get rid of no matter how much hot broth you drink. But you sit by the fire anyway, because the alternative is freezing. There is always a trade-off here. Want warmth? Breathe a little more death. Want fresh air? Stand outside until your teeth chatter out of your head. The strange thing is, after a while, you stop noticing it. Smoke becomes part of the air. Part of you, really. You adapt. You learn to duck under the lowest eddy as you cross the room. You find the sweet spot to sit where you stay warm, but don't gasp for breath. You learn to squint through the haze. Inside your home, there is just fog. Sometimes people try to make fancier things. There is talk of devices. Actual smoke holes cut into the roof. Primitive vents that let some of the smoke out. Maybe even a chimney if you are incredibly rich or skilled. But these are rare. Most people here live with the smoke. It's the devil's work, you know. Now, I don't want to exaggerate, but modern research has studied this kind of indoor air quality, specifically in open fire homes later in Scottish history. And the results are grim. High levels of particulate matter, increased risk of lung disease, eye irritation, reduced life expectancy. Scientists debate how bad it got in the Middle Ages. But it's safe to say if you manage to live a long life here, you did it coughing. But in the present, meaning our medieval present, there is no such thing as fresh air. You wipe your nose and gray comes out. You stir the pot, and a thin layer of soot forms on the top layer like sprinkled ash, and you eat it anyway. Because honestly, the ash is maybe the tastiest part. Someone opens the door to go out, and the sudden rush of fresh air cuts through the smoke like a knife. Cold, painful, brutally cold, but for a moment, the room feels bearable. You take a deep breath and instantly cough. Your lungs aren't used to something that isn't 80% combustion byproduct. Then the door closes and the smoke settles back in. Patient and suffocating as always. Your clothes stink. Everyone is covered in sweat. You don't realize it until someone new comes from another village smelling slightly different. Maybe smelling more like fish than smoke. And you realize how distinct you all smell. But no one bathes regularly. Not in this weather. Water freezes. Soap is a luxury. And unless you want to visit from hypothermia and the K-leech, you don't strip down to wash. Here's a fun fact. Some people believe the smoke actually protects you, drives away evil spirits, keeps sickness at bay, which is a strange irony considering how often it causes sickness. But still, in a world where invisible forces are held responsible for everything from the plague to sour milk, it makes sense. If your whole family is still breathing, maybe that black ceiling above your head isn't so bad. The children don't complain because they know nothing else. They run to the smoke inside the room as if it were mist from a haunted swamp. Their cheeks flushed, noses constantly running, hair thickened with fire and animal smell. On the coldest nights, they sleep closest to the hearth. Their small bodies curl like cats, breathing slowly. You look at the ceiling and wonder when it was last cleaned, though it doesn't matter. You'd need a ladder, a miracle, and a kind of optimism this place doesn't support. Besides, even if you scraped it clean, it will be black again by next week. That's just how some things are. And still, the fire burns because it has to. You throw another brick on and watch the flame catch. It always starts slow, but eventually comes to life with a hiss. The fire doesn't roar. It just murmurs a constant whisper in the dark. Not enough to warm you, but enough to keep you. Outside, the night is much darker than it should be. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, but it doesn't help much. It's made of wool, yes, but not the soft, luxurious kind. You are probably imagining that. This is something made of rough, itchy sheepskin still connected to its soul. It itches constantly, and despite its weight, it lets every draft of wind and damp pass right through to your skin. You try not to think about how many winters it has seen, how many people wore it before you, or what exactly that crusty stain on the hem is. Some things are better left undefined. In medieval Scotland, clothes aren't made for fashion. They are barely made for function. They are patched, worn, and reused until they become more thread than fabric. If something tears, you sew it. If it stains, you keep wearing it. If it smells, which it does, you pretend not to notice. Winter isn't time for clean laundry anyway. Water is frozen, soap is expensive, and wet clothes mean death. So the rule is simple. Keep dry, even if it means staying dirty. You dress in layers. Not because they keep you warm, but because that's all you have. A rough linen undergarment stiffened from too much washing in cold water. A heavy wool tunic, dark and full of holes. Maybe a cloak or coat if you inherited one from someone who died and had the sense to keep it until the end. Your legs are wrapped in itchy, sagging wool hose, tied with leather strips or twisted fabric. On your feet, if you're lucky, are cracked and misshapen leather shoes. If not, wool foot wraps, already damp from melted frost and yesterday's panic run to check the traps. And there is no such thing as waterproof here. Not really. Everything eventually gets wet. Wool helps retain some warmth when wet. But it's a losing battle. Once you get wet, you stay damp. If there is room, you dry off by the fire. If not, you don't. More than one villager has caught a chest cold after returning from the fields with rainwater dripping from their backs. And here, a chest cold can be the first step to an early grave. Still, people do their best to be creative. Cloaks are fastened at the shoulders with brooches or wooden toggles. Sometimes fur is draped around the neck if someone in the household managed to catch a fox or steal a pelt from someone unluckier. Hats and hoods are sewn from scrap fabric or sometimes felted wool, stiff and lumpy, but something to trap the heat trying to escape your skull at least. Gloves are rare. Fingers are usually left exposed, red and cracked. They turn into tools more than limbs. Some of the elders still wear clothes dyed with natural plant dyes. Pale yellows from lichens, browns from tree bark, soft grays from iron-rich mud. But winter tends to turn everything into a uniform survival palette of beige. The only pop of color might come from plaid or tartan fabric if you come from a Highland clan that holds tight to traditional patterns, not the modern tartans we romanticize now. These are more like bold, rough weaves with green and brown stripes and earth tones, woven on narrow looms draped, belted, and above all, functional. And speaking of belts, yes, you wear one. Everyone does. Not for fashion, but for utility. It carries your knife, maybe a pouch, maybe dried oats. You never know what you'll need in the cold. Your hands are often too numb to search your pockets. This keeps your gear ready at all times. You don't own much, but what you own needs to be on you always. Always. Now, let me tell you something a bit weird, but true. Some people stuff straw inside their clothes. Yes, they stuffed it between layers to trap body heat. In a way, it worked, like medieval insulation. The downside was you looked like a bloated scarecrow and probably creaked when you moved. But when caught between dignity and freezing, dignity stays at the door. And speaking of extreme realities, let's talk about lice. They are everywhere. You are scratching right now, and you aren't sure if it's from the wool or the bugs. But the truth is, lice are part of daily life. Everyone has lice. You comb them out as much as possible, pick them out of seams, and accept the rest. When bathing is nearly impossible in winter, lice practically throw a party in your layers. There are even traditional songs and jokes about them, mostly little rhymes told by the fire to keep from screaming. So yes, you are dressed in layers, but you are not dressed well. There are no modern thermal strategies, no moisture wicking or breathable fabrics. Everything is thick, itchy, and heavy. Your clothes weigh you down, especially when wet. And walking uphill in them feels like dragging a reluctant mattress behind you. Yet, you don't dare take them off. You wear them while sleeping, while eating, until they fall apart or someone dies and leave you a better set. Historians debate how standard these clothes were across Scotland. Some argue Highlanders and Lowlanders had very different styles influenced by trade, clan identity, and access to materials. Others believe the basics were the same. Wrap yourself in whatever you have, wear for a long time, and pray for spring. What is clear is that warmth was a constant priority and luxury in wealthier homes. There is evidence of fur linings, imported textiles from nobility, but for most people, warmth came from wool, fire, and body heat. And yes, the cold seeps not just into your hands and feet, but into your bones. It's the kind of cold that makes you move slower, think slower. You begin to dread the moment you have to undress for any reason. Changing clothes rarely becomes a planned activity, and usually involves someone waiting nearby with a blanket, another brick of peat. People sleep in their clothes not out of laziness, but because taking them off could be a death sentence. Tonight, wrap tight in your cloak, legs curled under you like a hibernating animal. You try to sleep again. Your feet are cold, hands worse. You tuck your hands into your armpits and breathe slowly, trying to ignore the wheeze in your chest and the itch behind your knee. Someone next to you stirs and pulls their blanket closer. You hear the slight rustle of straw and fabric, then just their breathing. Slow, deep cold. Outside, the frost climbs the walls silently again, as if checking to make sure you haven't forgotten. You haven't. The sheep aren't doing well. You can tell just by looking at them. The way their wool clumps together in frozen mats. How they huddle against the coop wall, bloodied and miserable, acting as if they know something is coming. And something is definitely coming. Maybe more frost, maybe another blizzard, Or maybe just a long period of icy nothingness that ruins everything quietly. Because here, winter doesn't kill dramatically. It kills with silence. In medieval Scotland, animals were lifelines. They weren't just animals. They were food, clothing, income, warmth, status, and hope wrapped in a furry, muddy package. Especially sheep. If you had sheep, you had wool. You had trade value. Maybe a little milk if the ewe was generous. And eventually meat if necessary. But in winter, they were just as vulnerable as you, maybe more so. Farming stops completely by November. The ground is too hard to work, snow too thick to dig, and the wind makes every outdoor chore feel like a punishment from a forgotten god. The fields are frozen, the earth cracked like dry bread. The scant remaining grass is brittle, yellowed, and buried under frost. The animals surviving winter aren't eating. They are enduring just like you. You brought the most fragile animals inside the coop. Sure, there is barely room, and the smell is quite pungent, but it's better than losing them. The cow stands quietly in the corner, her breath fogging the air, occasionally shifting, scattering the smoke under her hooves. Two goats lie curled by the fire, one quick enough to grab that spot first. The sheep get the shed, the lean-to, or whatever shelter you manage to cobblestone together from scrap wood, dry grass, and dwindling optimism. Feeding them is the hardest part. You planned for this. You stored hay, hid grain, dried bracken. In October, you counted everything carefully. You did mental math and hoped your neighbors weren't lying about how much they consumed. But now it's January, maybe February, and your stocks are lower than they should be. The sheep are eating the worst of what's left. Tough stalks, husks, dried leaves hastily swept up on a last sunny day. One has started gnawing on the wall. Another tried to eat a frozen piece of cloth. Your options are running out. Sheep don't show weakness easily, but when they do, it happens fast. One day they are up, the next they aren't, and the next they are stiff and silent. If the ground is soft enough, you bury them. If not, you drag them to the edge of the woods and let nature take its course. Scavengers need to eat too. Nothing personal. Just business. We are in the dead of winter, and when a sheep goes, you feel it immediately. It means one less fleece in the spring, one less trade at the market, one less source of meat. Though let's be honest, most people hesitate to slaughter their animals until the situation is truly dire. You don't kill a sheep just because it's hungry. You wait, you pray, and you only consider when the family starts boiling shoe leather and adding snow to thin the stew. And even then, there is a struggle, because slaughtering means giving up, and giving up means surrendering to winter. Yet, there is a practical side. Meat doesn't go far, but in this kind of cold, it lasts longer. Outdoors, the temperature is nature's butcher. You salt what you can. You smoke some in the rafters. Though peat smoke doesn't help the flavor. You cook the rest slowly, carefully. Nothing is wasted. Bones go to broth. Organs become a meal on their own, and if salvageable, the wool is stored. May be stiff with frost, but if spring comes, it will still be useful. Historical records show that in severe winters, animal mortality could reach very high levels, devastating levels. In some years, entire herds were wiped out by starvation, freezing, or hunted by predators from the wild. Wolves were still around back then. They would come down from the hills, lean and silent, drawn to the scent of desperation. A lone sheep, already weak, stood no chance. There's open debate among scholars about how effectively medieval Scots managed animal care during winter. Some argue that integrating animals into barn life, bringing them inside, even into the common living space, was a wise survival tactic for both animals and humans. Others suggest these conditions actually increased disease transmission, especially respiratory infections. Honestly, both are probably true. But when your survival depends on a single bleeding pile of wool, you don't have the luxury of debating hygiene. You see one of the sheep standing strangely by the lean-to, legs braced, eyes half bright. You already know. You reach out and stroke its flank. You feel its breath rising and falling slowly. Thin, labored. It won't last. You've seen this before. There's a kind of resignation in these creatures, as if they know they aren't meant for this. They were created for it. Their ancestors might have grazed on softer hills in milder climates. But these sheep are trying to survive in the same frozen misery as you. And here is a strange cultural detail. Some families named their sheep. Not all of them. Most are just called you or the brown one. But occasionally, you'd hear a name. A real name. Morag Bonnie, Old Red. It added a strange tenderness to everything. It made slaughtering a sheep in March feel less like a meal and more like a funeral. You weren't just eating meat. You were saying goodbye to a member of the household. It might sound sentimental, but when you spend every day looking at the same animals, relying on them, being tethered to them, yes, names start to stick. That night, you share a thin lamb broth with your family, salt, hot, and smelling faintly of smoke and fur. No one talks much while eating. The room is quiet except for the occasional clink of spoons and soft bleating from outside. You don't ask who the meat in the pot belonged to. You don't need to ask. Afterward, try to ignore that your stomach still feels empty. You wrap yourself in your cloak again. Outside, the wind is picking up. A harsh, sharp wind from the north. You feel it in the bones of the house. You feel it in your own bones. And you think about the sheep, the ones left, and how much longer they could hold on. how much longer you can hold on. The ale is stale again, but you drink it anyway. Not because you like the taste. Let's be honest. After a few cups, it starts to taste pleasant, like mold on cheese. But because it is safer than water. In fact, in this frozen, muddy corner of medieval Scotland, ale is the closest thing you can get to a health drink. It hydrates you. It gives a few calories. And it doesn't come with a bout of dysentery. So it is drunk. Water here is a gamble. Wells freeze. You think about how much longer you can hold on. The ale is stale again, but you drink it anyway. Not because you like the taste. Let's be honest, after a few cups, the moldy cheese flavor starts to grow on you. But because it is safer than water. In fact, in this frozen, muddy corner of medieval Scotland, ale is the closest thing to a health drink you can get. It hydrates you. It gives you a few calories. And it doesn't come with a bout of dysentery. So it is drunk. Water here is a gamble. Wells freeze. Streams are icy and fast-flowing, but they're often shared with animals and, worse, everything the animals leave behind. Boiling it would help, of course, but wood and peat are scarce and reserved for truly important things, like not freezing to death in your sleep. So you drink ale. Everyone drinks it. Small children, the elderly, monks, your uncle who smells like wet wool and bad decisions. Everyone sips weak, cloudy ale from cracked mugs to stay alive. This isn't the frothy golden beer you imagine. It is thick, brown, and often full of sediment. Some batches are almost non-alcoholic, fermented just enough to kill the worst germs. Others are stronger, brewed longer or with heartier grains. And if you aren't careful, can hit you like a tumble on the forehead. But even then, intoxication is a side effect rather than the goal. This isn't a party. This is a survival struggle with a mild buzz. Brewing is a communal skill. Every family has someone who knows a method. The process is theoretically simple. Melt some barley, boil it, strain it, cool it, add yeast if you have it, and wait. But in practice, it is a delicate art of timing, temperature, and not accidentally poisoning yourself. If your batch goes wrong, you don't waste it. You just strain it a second time. Maybe mix in some herbs to mask the bad taste and pretend it's a medicinal drink. In the village, women handle most of the brewing. They are called aloes, and their role is quietly vital. Good aloes are respected, maybe even feared. People smile more, even laughed. For a few hours, the cold didn't feel so sharp. This wasn't a small magic. Of course, there were rules. Even then, people understood the power of drink. If you drank too much ale, suddenly your neighbor's sheep looked like a personal insult. Fights would break out, slurred arguments in the snow, someone swinging a stick unsteadily and with even less aim. The village elders usually intervened, sometimes with harsh words, sometimes with a solid knock to the head. Drunkenness was tolerated, but only if you still did your part in the morning. If you didn't, you might find yourself mysteriously short of wood, or wake up to find someone had accidentally borrowed your cloak. Still, ale was so ingrained in life that even religious leaders allowed it. Monasteries, of course, produced their own wine and ale with more consistent recipes and ingredients brought from trade. They made higher quality drinks. The monks knew what they were doing. Their ale was stronger, smoother, and kept better. It was usually stored in cool, dry cellars carved into hills or rock. And perhaps it is no coincidence that winter survival rates were higher there. While sipping warm, filling, and professionally brewed ale throughout the winter, you are surprised at how holy life can feel. Back in your hut, your family shares a mug. Yes, a single mug passed from hand to hand after dinner. Even though it smells of slightly sour grain and old socks and is warm from the fire, no one complains. You sip carefully, let it slide down your throat, and a feeling of warmth appears in your stomach. Not much, but something, and right now, something means everything. In Old Scots, there is even a word for the warmth ale gives. Maybe they call it cozy, though some argue the term appeared later. Still, the idea holds a combination of contentment, firelight, a full stomach, and slightly flushed cheeks. For a brief moment, you don't feel like the world is trying to kill you, but not every drink is the same. Some villages brew stronger spirits. If there is honey, sometimes mead or herbal mixtures. It smells more like medicine than pleasure. There's even a story about a spice mixture brewed with weeds, tree bark, and possibly hallucinogenic mushrooms used at medieval festivals. Did people see visions on those long nights? Maybe the visions told them spring was coming? Certainly. Were they right? Almost never. Also, scholars frequently debate how alcoholic medieval ale actually was. Some argue daily table beer was so weak it barely qualified as liquor, while others believe it was strong enough to explain the number of brawls recorded in local legends. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, strong enough to be effective, weak enough to keep you functioning course. If you want to turn into a good drunk, then fill another cup. Tonight, after taking a sip, you stare into the fire for a long time. The peat crackles softly. The mug warms your hands. Outside, the wind has finally died down, and snow is falling in that eerie, quiet way that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. You drink ale to numb your thoughts, but it doesn't turn into a thought. It turns into a hazy calm. You think about the days ahead, the dwindling sacks of grain, the dying sheep. You think about the heavy smell of smoke on your clothes. You think about whether spring will come and when. You think about how many people won't make it there, but for now, you take another sip because it's warm, because it's safe, because it's the only clean thing left in the world. We are in the middle of winter. The nights are long, ink black, and spread over the land like a wet wool blanket that never lifts. It feels like it's pressing against the walls of your hut, waiting for the fire to go out so it can seep in. You feel in your bones that we have passed the halfway point of winter the turning point of light and shadow. But it doesn't feel like a celebration. Not really. It just feels heavier. But tonight, something is different. There's a stir among your neighbors, a hum of low expectation, the kind of tension that arises when people are cold, bored, and desperately need an excuse to do something other than shiver quietly. It is time for the Midwinter Festival. Now, a scene from the Middle Ages might be playing in your mind. If the ale was bad, you'd know it by the sick faces around the hearth. If the ale was strong, a party full of roasted boar, acrobatic feats, and hearty laughter echoing off stone walls. Yes, no, this is a rural village in Scotland in winter, where your greatest luxury is a turnip and a second-hand cloak that smells of regret. But even here, even now, people need a break. And midwinter, whether it's Yule, the Feast of St. Bridget Imbolc, or just that night when extra candles are lit, is your best chance for it. You gather with the others near the longhouse. It's not fancy, just a slightly larger boat-shaped building whose roof leaks slightly less than yours. Inside, the fire is already burning, and someone has thought of everything down to the last detail. Dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a pot simmering by the hearth with something slightly sweet, and a single thin candle burning in front of a carved wooden figure. It could be St. Bridget or an older goddess, her features softened by smoke and time. No one says for sure I in this village. Some things remain unspoken. Midwinter festivals in medieval Scotland were a strange and magnificent mix of old pagan traditions and new Christian customs. Depending on the year and the mood of the church, festivals varied. Depending on your mood, you might be singing hymns one moment and dancing around a haystack the next. There are old stories passed down from elders, tales of the Oak King and the Holly King battling for control of the seasons, rituals to encourage the sun's return, lighting fires, burning last year's greenery, and sometimes banging pots and pans together like drunken farmers to scare away evil spirits. Coincidentally, tonight most people are drunk, because this time of year is when you indulge in the good things, a harder month ahead, maybe a few apples hidden under straw, a dusty jar of honey from the monastery if someone was clever or generous, and if a family was lucky enough to save a sausage or two, IT is brought out, sliced thinly, and distributed with a quiet reverence like a sacrament. Children laugh. Adults try to remember how to smile. Someone starts humming a tune, and it quickly turns into a song, and then suddenly people are singing. Not beautifully, not in harmony, but together. The kind of singing that reminds you your voice still works. Your lungs haven't completely failed, and there is still a little humanity left inside you. All wool and smoke. And then comes the storytelling. Always stories. Tonight's story is about a silky woman who wandered inland one winter, lost her sealskin in the snow, and married the farmer who found it. But when spring came, she found the skin again and left with a look that made the cows cry for 3 days. Sad and strange. And no one is sure if it's meant to be a warning, a love story, or both, but it fills the air. Importantly, these stories are old, older than the church, older than the written word, told by candlelight and remembered through repetition. Some say they keep the world turning. If the story stopped one day, the sun stops. Is that true? Probably not. But in the middle of a winter this cold, belief is often stronger than reality. Here is a fun historical fact. Some midwinter traditions involve torch-lit processions around the village boundaries. It had symbolic meaning, of course, warding off the darkness, reaffirming the community, reminding the land that people still lived here. In bad years, these marches were silent. In better years, there were songs, even shouting, and indeed, in careless villages, someone might put on an animal mask and burst from behind the trees to scare winter away. You would want to meet that man after his 4th cup of ale. Of course, not everyone participated. Some stayed behind, too sick, too old, or simply not happy enough to join the celebration. And sometimes you couldn't help but notice the gaps. The people who didn't make it through the last few weeks, the coughing neighbor, the child who went hunting and never returned, the old woman whose fire went out. Their absence sat in the corners of the room like smoke, heavy, silent, and impossible to ignore. But for a few precious hours, none of that mattered. Not the cold, not the hunger, not the grief. Just laughter. The kind of laughter that bursts out suddenly and surprises even the person doing it. You laugh so hard your ribs ache, and someone tells you to save your breath for the next blizzard. Someone else accidentally knocks over a candle, and half the village panics. But it's okay. It's okay. The house didn't burn down. Not tonight. Scholars debate even today how widespread or uniform these winter traditions were. The hearth is still burning. But now, not out of desperation, just comfort. You sit with your back against the wall, legs stretched out, a piece of cheese and a hunk of bread in your lap. The dry and patched cloak hangs on your shoulders like an old friend. You hated it in January. You would burn it tomorrow if spring offered you a new one. But tonight it is enough. You think about winter, not just the cold, but the days blending into one another. The nights counting drips from the ceiling or staring at the door listening for things that never come. The hunger, the howling, the silence. It all feels so far away now, like it happened to someone else, or like a bad dream where you tell yourself it wasn't that bad, even though it was and still is. You carry it with you. Everyone does. It changes the way you walk, the way you look at the sky, the way you hold your spoon when food is scarce. It makes you slow to trust and quick to give thanks. It teaches you that survival isn't always loud or heroic. Sometimes it's enough just to wake up and lace your boots again. There's a debate that still goes on, always goes on. Were medieval peasants tougher than modern people? Whether constant proximity to death, discomfort, and hardship made them stronger or just numb is unknown. All you know is that in the middle of winter, when everything froze and no one was sure they would see the thaw, you kept going, and so did they. Tonight, you lied down on your mat without lighting a fire. You don't need it. It is warm. The roof isn't leaking. A bird sings outside the window. And for the first time in months, you don't flinch at the sound of wings. And before your eyes close, you whisper something into the darkness. Not a prayer, not a fear. Just a thank you. That's it. A long, wet, frozen, muddy, miserable Scottish winter. You made it through, from your aching, blistered feet to your cracked, wind-burned lips. You barely survived and maybe came out with few calluses and stories worth telling, or worth suppressing entirely. Life in medieval Scotland wasn't about grandeur or glory. It was about endurance. And winter tested that endurance more than anything else. It stripped life down to its wildest form. The challenges of nature, the cold, the hunger, the silence, and yet the things that required you to keep going. No central heating, no store-bought soup, no weather warnings. Just instinct, grit, and a fire that needed feeding. But now look at you, sitting there, snug under your duvet, hopefully with soft music playing in the background, and not a single wolf at your door. Luxury, as you drift off to sleep tonight. Think of the quiet strength of those peasants, their hands in the soil, their shoulders against the wind, their eyes on the sky, measuring the clouds like fortune tellers. Think about what it means to keep going when the world gives you nothing but darkness and ice. And remember that even the longest winters, the ones that seem like they will never end, eventually do. So sleep easy. You have weathered the worst of it. And tomorrow the ground will be a little softer, the sun a little higher, and maybe, just maybe, you will hear birds chirping before breakfast. Sleep well, brave survivor of the Scottish winter. Sweet dreams from sleepy history.